Hello, my name is Eve McIntyre. I'm a cognitive behavioural psychotherapist and I hold full accreditation with the BABCP. My video for today is discussing anxiety and cognitive behavioural therapy and how this can help. I'm going to talk a little bit about anxiety, what people can experience when they're going through this, how CBT can help, and if you'd be interested in doing some work together, how you can get in touch. So, just to start off with just sort of breaking down what anxiety is and what that can maybe feel like. Anxiety is a really natural human emotion to experience. So if we're faced with a job interview, giving a presentation, perhaps meeting someone for the first time, a level of nervousness or anxiety would sort of be quite natural, expected, and anticipated. And what we would almost sort of normally sort of experience in those situations is actually that initial level of nervousness or anxiety would dissipate over time. It wouldn't stop us from doing anything. It would be at a level that would feel quite manageable. I guess kind of from the experience I've had from working with people that experience anxiety that need support with it, it's often at a level where that anxiety probably isn't dissipating or reducing down much. It may be sort of bubbling away in the background. It may also be leading the person to not do things that they might do normally or maybe that they would want to do. So it's starting to really limit their life and having an impact in that way and maybe what they would want to be doing. And it can also cause really unpleasant sort of physical sensations for the person that's going through it. So it's not uncommon for a lot of people that I work with that have anxiety to experience physical sensations such as sweating, heart rate changes, changes with breathing, perhaps even sleep disturbance or changes in appetite as well. And we can understand this is often linked to our sort of our fight or flight response that we have. But unfortunately, kind of the more we experience that, and if we're then starting to avoid situations, the anxiety sort of can build and build, and unfortunately leave us feeling sort of quite stuck in that cycle of anxiety where we begin to sort of fear the fear almost. And in terms of kind of when we think about maybe why we experience this, I'm going to sort of just explain a little bit about this. There's quite a few different ways of trying to understand anxiety. Some of it may be linked to genetics, for example. Other factors might be that there's been some negative experiences that have maybe contributed to having those feelings of anxiety. I'm going to explain a little bit about cognitive behavioural therapy and how we can understand that anxiety is being maintained, and then in turn how CBT can then help you if you're experiencing anxiety and this is something that you might be wanting some support with. So in cognitive behavioural therapy, we use sort of what we call a 5 areas maintenance cycle. This is sort of our bread and butter. It's our way of sort of making sense of why someone might feel the way that they do. So when we sort of think about mapping out feelings of anxiety, it's about being curious about kind of what the triggers are, the situation or time of day or places that you're in when you start to notice those feelings of anxiety. And then tracing through the physical sensations that you have, the emotional responses that you have, the thoughts that you experience, and also the behaviours. And what we're sort of understanding about anxiety is that you have these sort of 5 key areas that are all contributing to one another that are maintaining that sort of level of anxiety. When we start to look at kind of more specific problems that link with anxiety, there's a really big focus that we pay on the cognition side of things, and this might differ depending on the type of anxiety difficulty you might be experiencing. So say, for example, with someone that experiences panic, often the cognitions or thoughts that really that we feel are kind of at the core of that anxiety is what we call as a catastrophic misinterpretation of a physical sensation. So someone that maybe notices a change within their physical response, they notice their heart rate is changing, and their thought is, I think I'm going to have a heart attack, and that is what can then really lead into that kind of fear. So it's almost that sort of the thought about what's happening, how someone is making sense of it, that can then sort of understandably lead into sort of feelings of panic or fear. With social anxiety, it's cognitions that link with a fear of being judged, and that meaning being placed behind it, causing more anxiety than when that person is in a social situation. So it's really highlighting that role around actually what we're thinking has a really big impact then on what we can feel in terms of anxiety. It sort of rests on the idea that we feel what we think and we think what we feel. If we're feeling anxious, our interpretations and the way that we're making sense of a situation are often likely to be really closely linked to that emotion that we're feeling at that time compared to if we weren't feeling anxious. The cognitions and the interpretations that we have around it are quite different. Equally, it goes the other way. So if we have sort of thoughts that pop in terms of actually, I think someone is judging me in this social situation, we're going to naturally start to feel more anxious and more on edge because that thought has sort of been introduced, and it makes us feel sort of more alert when we're in those sort of situations. So from a CBT side, I guess kind of if I'm just trying to sort of summarise what I'm saying here, we're really interested in the core kind of meaning that gets placed behind something that feels fearful, the interpretation that gets placed behind it. Our thoughts can be very automatic, and we've also got sort of cognitive processing as well that kind of lends its hand with sort of this sort of thought process that can be there. So say, for example, if there is someone that has social anxiety and they have a thought they're being judged, they might think of all of the other occasions where that's happened. It's sort of this self-confirming bias, or they might even look for all of the information within their environment that might prove it. Or it may lead them to completely withdraw and go in and actually then really miss vital cues that they're not being judged. And it really places a really big emphasis then on actually that role of thought having such a big weighting on then what we emotionally feel and then how we experience that situation. So that's one really key part with cognitive behavioural therapy, is the cognitions, the thoughts, the cognitive processing we have, and how that can really shape feelings of anxiety and distress in a given situation. With generalised anxiety, that's more characterised by lots of worry, and it's a fear that sort of almost rests on a fear of kind of uncertainty within situations. We're also really curious in cognitive behavioural therapy around behaviours. So what we can understand is that actually if we become quite fearful within a situation, we've got our body's fight or flight response identifying a threat in our situation, sending these important messages around our survival, ways of us keeping safe. It's quite instinctive that we can then start to avoid certain situations. So we try to sort of retreat, flee, get out of them, and maybe not return back into them, because actually why would we go back into something that our body has previously triggered off and flagged to us is threatening? Alongside sort of the role of kind of avoidance with anxiety, we're often really curious about perhaps other behaviours that may be a bit more subtle that can also be maintaining the feelings of anxiety as well. Again, these are really instinctive, and actually it's quite savvy for the person that's done it, because they're doing it as a way to kind of reduce the level of distress and soothe that threat system that's kicking off. So what I'm referring to here, it may be say someone, for example, that has quite sort of awful panic may not go out on their own due to a fear of something happening to them. So they would always need to have somebody with them. They may always need to have sort of their mobile phone. They may check a Fitbit or sort of a similar sort of device to sort of monitor their physical sensations all the time. It may also be the sort of presence of being near an exit all the time, or almost planning what needs to happen before going into a situation. These are what we call safety behaviours. They're things that we do because we're anxious, but it can also maintain the anxiety, because actually anxiety, when we feel that need to avoid or engage in safety behaviours, they are initially helpful, they are very instinctive, but unfortunately they don't give us that opportunity to learn maybe we could be okay without them, because it feels too threatening to not do them. So from a CBT side, that's where we're really, really curious in terms of delving into. It's understanding the meanings and interpretations that are placed behind that particular area that's causing you that fear or anxiety, and also what you're doing in response to it as well. So in terms of how CBT can help, it is looking at those two key areas. So there's some really useful sort of strategies that are very practical, very skills based, that are designed to sort of walk you through working through those feelings of anxiety. I'm really mindful that actually a lot of the time when I'm working with someone that has anxiety, there can be a lot of fear about actually starting to work through feelings of anxiety. It's a real sort of, I guess, dilemma really, is actually often people can know what makes them feel anxious. They don't want to feel that way, but actually it's really threatening, that idea around actually then facing up to the areas that cause fear. So CBT can very much be adapted to go at a pace that does feel right for you, but there would be some level of anxiety that would be felt in order to have that element of learning that takes place. So we can use techniques and strategies that look at developing alternative thought patterns and alternative ways of kind of approaching situations by gradually reducing any of those safety behaviours and making sure there aren't things that you're avoiding. Bit by bit, and in a way that does feel helpful for you and hopefully empowers you to keep sort of going through bit by bit. So I hope that is helpful in terms of giving a snapshot of why cognitive behavioural therapy looks at the areas that it does, and how that links with how kind of our thoughts and our behaviours maintain anxiety, but also in turn why we then use the techniques and strategies that we do as a way of sort of trying to help you break out of feelings of anxiety so you don't continue to feel sort of stuck or feel that it's impacting you, or ruling the roost in that sort of way, really. If you would be interested in working together, you're more than welcome to either fill out my contact form or contact me directly via email, and I have included my email and my webpage right at the end of this presentation. Thank you.